pay money to go through there. So that's just part of an additional event, part of the game. Going back, so Andalusia, because we have a center of trade and people are sending their merchants there, we get a toll. Okay, so that's monthly income. Monthly expenses now, our investments are 24.8. These are technology investments. As I increase them, or as I decrease them, they'll decrease, but they'll always equal to the same amount depending on our treasury. I'll talk about this more later, but basically investments is how much we're spending on technology. Obviously, this is always going to be your biggest expense, depending on what you set your technology to. Advisor salaries are, we talked about this earlier, how much we're paying all these guys, depending on how good they are. So because Pedro is 4 stars, while Nuno and Ramon are only 2 stars, they're less expensive. So that's the 0.8. Colonial maintenance, it depends on this bar down here. If you can look down at the bottom, colonial maintenance. It's underneath missionary maintenance. This depends on how much we're going to pay for our colonies. I'll talk about this later. But once we start getting colonies, we'll start having to pay maintenance. Especially early on in the game, colonial maintenance will be very expensive and very hard to maintain. So you don't want to go and start colonizing like the entire new world immediately. You're going to want to do it step by step, make sure you have the economy to fund it, and then continue it. Colonies, I'll say, are a short-term expense. Like you won't get any gold from them at the beginning, but at the very end, they can reap major rewards for you. Generally, just because there'll be more lucrative trade goods in the New World, such as furs, sugar plantations, spices. If you go eastwards to India and China, you have China where, again, you have spices. I can't remember all. Tobacco is a huge one, of course. So, yeah, tobacco, yeah. What's another big one? We can look at all the different trade goods later in the ledger. But basically, colonies can reap a huge reward at the end for you. Yeah. So taking just any part of China or India or just trading in their trade zones will get us a lot of money from that. Spices. Thank you. Yeah, spices is a huge one. As for the person who's asking, is this being recorded? Yes, I can't be sure that I'll be able to have this up forever, but I'll try to keep it up for as long as I can. Anyway, moving on. So that's colonial maintenance. So right now we have none. Military maintenance, I'll talk about that later, but that's basically how much we're upkeeping our military, and like our soldiers and our ships, our fleets. I'll talk about that more later when we get to military. Missionary maintenance, basically when I send my missionary to Granada, once I conquer Granada, it's going to cost me money to continue operating there, and it usually does cost quite a bit. But right now we don't have any. We haven't sent any missionaries, so this is 0. Okay, and interest. Interest, like whenever you go to a bank and you take out a loan, you're gonna have to pay interest on that loan. It'll start off small, and you can hire an advisor to decrease the amount of interest. But the longer you wait and the longer you just leave it, the more and more expensive it will become to use. So make sure your interest should be 0 all the time, but if you take a loan, make sure to pay it back immediately as soon as possible when the pop-up comes. So that's 23.5. And then you have some additional things like tribute. For example, this is just showing your monthly things. For example, if I beat up Portugal, I could force them to give me some money. So for that year, it would show me how much tribute I got. You can also show, for example, this is especially important for the hordes. I'll talk about hordes later on. For example, Golden Horde, well, no shit. Golden Horde is a horde. But then there's other ones like the Timwords and other ones we cannot see right now. But they will ask you for either you will have to pay them tribute every month, or they will pay you tribute. And then you have war subsidies. Basically, let's say France was fighting a war with England, and I don't want France to get too powerful, so I'll help England by giving them some money. So you click here. I'll talk about all these different functions later on. Basically, I can give them more subsidies. Right now it's grayed out because they're not fighting a war, but someone who is fighting a war is Poland, I believe. So I could give them war subsidies. And I'll talk about this later, but depending on how much you want to give them, it'll appear here, war subsidies. And so, obviously, 24.8 and our monthly income subtracted from 23.5 gives us a balance of 1.2. And that's how much we're making. You usually want it to be above so that we'll continuously be making money each month. Most likely, though, this will go into the negatives, and that's not a bad thing, by the way, because at the end of the year, we'll get a very large yearly, and on January 1st, a yearly tax return, basically. It's basically all your citizens pay a yearly tax, and that'll go to our balance, and that's a huge part of it. So going negative per month is fine as long as you're just losing like -1, because then at the end of the year you'll get like a plus, like a plus 15 or a plus 20, depending on when you're playing game, on how early or how late you're playing game. Okay, and then this is inflation. Inflation basically, like it does in real life, it increases the price of everything, and it can get to the point where you have runaway inflation, which is basically game over. I mean, you can try to bring it down, but it's extremely difficult. Always keep your inflation between 0 and, like, I would say a maximum of 1. I would say even a maximum of 0.5. It's okay, like, later on in the game, you are going to get some natural inflation. Like, if you think about today, in today's economies, it's natural, it's healthy to have some inflation in a country. That means growth. But you want to keep it very low, okay, below, I would say, 0.5 and definitely below 1. To the point where it starts to become very extreme is above 5, and that's when things start to get a lot more expensive. And when I mean things get expensive, I mean like building armies, like everything that costs money will now cost more because your currency has become devalued and it's going to cost you more money to make things. To get more money, though, the reason why we get inflation is through printing money. So someone's asking what raises inflation and what can I do to lower it? I'm going to talk about that right now. And someone else is asking how can you field a large enough army early and mid-game without minting inflation? There are several ways of doing it. If you remember, guys, I got Raymond Ponce de Leon. He's the master of the mint. He's going to decrease my inflation. Also, there's also a policy, national idea. I'll talk about this later, of course, which will also decrease inflation. There are many different methods you can use. Literally, just a simple Google search. If you just type in, what can I do to lower inflation, EU3 question mark into Google, will get you a list of things. But it's very important to make sure, as we can see here, inflation is changed by -0.04. Right now we have 0 inflation, so we can actually abuse this. We can actually increase, we can start printing money up to a certain point. As we can see, inflation is now changed by 0, but we can continue until it gets to, yeah, let's continue. Oh, see, now it's hit 0.01. That means it's going to start increasing by 0.01 each year. So we're going to decrease it again, just to the very limit at 0. Okay, so we're going to be minting a little bit, mint a bit of money, and that'll kind of help us with our monthly balance, which is -3.2. However, minting will decrease the amount you have to spend on technology. I'll talk about technology right now. As you can see the numbers here, like government 4.7, production 4.6, trade 1.8, naval 4.5. These are basically how much points you're spending, how much money you're spending on each one. So if I increase my inflation, for example, to the top, you see it goes all the way down to 0. I have no more money to spend on technology. So, but just increasing it a little bit, this is what I do. Just before it gets to 0.01, and then I lock it. You can lock all of these sliders and all sliders in the game by just right-clicking, and I locked it. Other ways of doing it, as you can see, if you just hover over it, so 0.04 from mining, 0 from our reliance on gold mines, while our banks, tax assessors, and centralization policy reduce it by 0.04. So generally speaking, there are many different ways of decreasing it. Most of them are only available to you towards the end of the game. And as for the person who was asking how can you field a large enough army in early mid-game, that's the exact reason why they have inflation, so that you cannot field a very large army and that expansion is limited. Later on, as we get richer, as we expand, we'll have a lot more economic abilities because we'll get more money, more income, and we won't have to rely on the treasury as much, manipulating the treasury. Okay, with that, before I talk about technology, here's how you take out a loan. Just clicking on it will give you a loan. So if I hover over it, you see it takes out a 5-year loan of 148. So you have up to 5 bank loans at the same time. Right now the interest is 9%, and this will increase obviously if we fail to pay back our 148 in 5 years. By the way, and this is actually fixed in Europa Universalis IV, thank God, you cannot pay back whenever you want to. You have to wait those entire 5 years. And pro tip, by the way, if you are going to take out a loan, which I hardly ever do, usually the computer will automatically take out a loan for you once you go below 0. Do it on January 1st, because that's when you have your most money. That's when you get your largest tax return, which I'll demonstrate. So doing it in December, for example, when you have the least amount of money, you've spent it all, is going to be very hard for you to repay it. So that's loans. As for interest, you can decrease it through, I believe, administration, or was it? I can't remember exactly. But specifically, there is a person that does that for you, a great man. He's one of these people. Here, banker. So you see, interest minus 1%. So I could hire him, and he would help decrease the interest if I had interest. Okay, this is how much I want to spend on missionary maintenance. Missionaries, each year they have a certain amount of... I'll talk about this later again. But sending a missionary has a certain percentage of success chance. So for example, if I wanted, let's say Cordoba or Andalusia was Muslim, then I could send which they're not, by the way, they're Catholic, as we can see up here. We could send a missionary there, and each year there will be a 6.4% chance that the province will convert to our religion. If we decrease this, if we don't fund it properly, the percentage chance will decrease. The chance of successfully converting will decrease. So if you want to quickly do it, it is going to cost you some more money, but you can put it full up. If you're strapped for cash, this should be what you're decreasing though. Colonial maintenance, we don't have currently any colonies to support, as it says, but this depends on how much our colonies will grow, how much we're going to support our colonies. Right now we don't have any colonies, but if I put this down to 0, they're not going to grow at all. In fact, they'll start decreasing, and they might disappear completely. So for faster colonial growth, and I'll talk about colonies more later, keep this at 100%. But again, if you're strapped for cash, this should be one of the first things that you should be decreasing. Down here, we can see raise war taxes. So we cannot raise war taxes since we're not at war, but this will increase our national tax modifier, which is up here, national tax, by 50%, which is a huge boost. So if you're strapped for cash, you're in a long war, this is a good thing to do. In fact, sometimes you can even exploit it because if you're in like a short war and you just want like some short-term cash and you don't care about the monthly war exhaustion, you can use it, I suppose. But if it becomes a very drawn-out war, this can become painful because monthly war exhaustion is increased, and I'll talk about that in a second.